She arrived for work, but found more than just ruined walls. He set his own house on fire to erase a past that burned too intensely. When the two of them met, the silence became a kind of temptation. And that night, everything that was pent up exploded. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. The Caravelli estate was more than an ancestral inheritance built upon the hills of Charlottesville. It was a living stone scar, breathing secrets, guilt and silences that had never been buried. A fire had consumed it 7 years earlier, leaving not only charred walls but an interrupted story, the mysterious death of the heir Leon Caravelli's fiancée, and the sudden disappearance of America's most promising artist, who had since shut himself off from the world. Clara Santoro gripped the steering wheel of her white Ford Focus as she climbed the dirt road leading to the property. The curves snaked between oak and pine trees, and the scent of red clay mixed with the sweet smell of tobacco curing in neighboring barns wafted into the car through the open window. At 36, Clara's face bore the marks of someone who had once had everything and lost it. Her brown eyes, which had once shone with a passion for sacred art, now held a caution she had learned to wear like a second skin. The invitation to restore the frescoes in the chapel of the Caravelli estate had come through the Virginia Department of Historic Resources on a cold January morning in Richmond. For 2 years, Clara had been working as a freelancer, taking on small jobs in country churches, far from the major projects that were once her specialty. Far, too, from the memories of a relationship that had nearly broken her and the premature death of her father, Anthony Santoro, a renowned restorer whose name had been tarnished by a scandal that was never fully explained. When the wrought iron gate swung open before her, Clara felt a shiver she couldn't explain. The estate stretched out before her eyes like a scene from an American Gothic novel. The colonial manor house, with its whitewashed walls and blue-shuttered windows, maintained a melancholic beauty, even with the marks of the fire still visible on one of its wings. Grand magnolia trees lined the main drive, and in the distance, nestled among the mountains that cradled the valley, stood the tower of the ruined chapel. Clara parked near the main house's veranda and was greeted by Mrs. Vance, a woman with white hair tied in a bun, who had managed the property with an iron fist for over 30 years. Her small, sharp eyes assessed Clara from head to toe before allowing a polite smile. "You must be the restorer from New York," Mrs. Vance said, wiping her hands on her embroidered apron. "Mr. Leon is waiting for you in the library, but I'll warn you now, he hasn't been very sociable lately." Clara followed Mrs. Vance through hallways that smelled of beeswax and lavender, observing the paintings that decorated the walls, family portraits, Virginian landscapes, still lifes that spoke of a wealth built over generations. But there were gaps in the decor, empty spaces where other paintings had clearly once hung. The library occupied the entire ground floor of the east wing. The walls were covered with walnut shelves that rose to the arched ceiling, filled with books in English, French, and Italian. Tall windows let in the golden late-afternoon light, creating a play of shadows that danced among the antique furniture. Leon Caravelli had his back to her when Clara entered, looking through the window at what remained of the chapel. Tall, broad-shouldered beneath a white linen shirt, with dark hair showing threads of grey at the temples, he was 48, but carried a dignity that made him seem timeless. When he turned to greet her, Clara felt the impact of his green, eyes as intense as 2 raw emeralds. "Clara Santoro," he said, and his voice was deep, polite, but carried a coldness she noticed immediately. "Anthony Santoro's daughter." The mention of her father made Clara stiffen her posture. "Yes, I'm his daughter, but I imagine you hired me on my own merits." Leon watched her for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Clara felt as if he could see right through her, as if every scar she carried was transparent under that gaze. She wore dark jeans, a simple white blouse, and comfortable sneakers, nothing too formal but suitable for the work she would be doing. Her brown hair was tied back in a low ponytail, and she carried a worn leather portfolio with her tools and documents. "Your merits," he repeated, and there was something in the way he said it that made Clara feel there were layers of meaning she couldn't decipher. "Yes, I read about your work at St. Francis Church in Staunton. Impressive how you managed to recover those 18th century frescoes after the damage from the mining operations. Clara relaxed slightly. That had been one of her most challenging and successful jobs in recent years. Traditional techniques still work better than any modern technology when it comes to sacred art, she said. Patience, respect for the original material, and knowledge of the period's techniques are essential. Leon walked over to a table where documents and old photographs were spread out. The family chapel was built in 1820, he explained, with frescoes painted by an Italian artist who came specifically to America during the early Republic. For generations, it was the spiritual heart of this property. Weddings, baptisms, first communions, until 7 years ago. He stopped talking, and Clara felt the tension that settled in the room. There was a pain there, something Leon wasn't saying. She knew this language of silence well. She had learned to recognize it in herself. Was the fire accidental? She asked, keeping her tone professional. We don't know, Leon answered without looking at her. We never discovered the exact cause, but when the flames were controlled, the frescoes were destroyed. 7 years of neglect haven't improved the situation. Clara picked up some of the photographs showing the chapel's current state. The images were devastating. Blackened walls, chunks of fallen plaster, frescoes that had once told sacred stories, now unrecognizable smudges. But even so, she could see the beauty that had once existed there. It will be a difficult job, she said, analyzing every detail. I'll need at least 3 months working every day, and I can't guarantee I'll be able to save everything. Time is not an issue, Leon said. I've had the guest cottage prepared for you. It's near the chapel, so it will be convenient for your work. Clara looked at him surprised. That's not necessary. I can stay in town and— I insist, Leon interrupted, and there was an authority in his voice that brooked no argument. This work requires total dedication. Besides, the property is vast and the road can be dangerous at night. There was something in the way he said it that made Clara feel as if she were being drawn into something larger than a simple restoration job. But the offer was generous, and saving money on lodging would be helpful. She nodded. Very well. When can I start? Tomorrow, if you like, Leon said, and for the first time he offered something that might have been a smile. Father Zeno, our chaplain, will show you the chapel and explain some details about the family's religious history. He knows every stone of that place. When Leon mentioned Father Zeno, Clara noticed a subtle shift in his expression. There was something there she couldn't identify. Respect, perhaps, but also an underlying tension. That night, settled in the cottage 200 yards from the main house, Clara unpacked her things and tried to process the day's impressions. The cottage was simple but comfortable, with rustic wooden furniture, a stone fireplace, and a porch that offered a privileged view of the ruined chapel. It was a warm Virginia summer night, but Clara felt a strange chill. There was something about this place that unsettled her, an energy she couldn't name. As she organized her work tools, natural bristle brushes, special solvents, magnifying glasses of different strengths, delicate spatulas, she thought of her father. Anthony Santoro had been one of the most respected restorers in the country until the scandal that ruined his career. Clara never knew exactly what happened, only that it involved accusations of deliberately damaging a sacred work during a restoration. He died 2 years later, taking the truth with him. The Santoro name, which had once opened doors, had become a weight Clara carried. She was thinking about this when she heard footsteps on the porch. Through the window, she saw the silhouette of an older man in a cassock walking slowly toward the chapel. It must be Father Zeno. There was something in his movements that suggested total familiarity with the place, as if every stone on the path were an extension of himself. Clara watched until he disappeared into the darkness, wondering what secrets that man held about the Caravelli family. Something told her that the next few months would be far more complex than simply restoring damaged frescoes. There were layers of history in that place, and she had a feeling she was about to peel back every single one of them. When she finally went to sleep, Clara dreamed of flames dancing among painted angels, of green eyes watching her through curtains of smoke, and of her father's voice whispering her name through the stone walls of the ruined chapel. On the other side of the property, Leon Caravelli remained awake in his private studio, a room no one else was allowed to enter. The walls were covered with his own works, paintings he hadn't shown anyone in years, women with closed eyes in ecstasy, naked, angels in freefall. And now, scattered on the table, were the first brushstrokes of a new face, Clara Santoro's, though she didn't know it. Because in Clara, there was something Leon had lost years ago. Faith. And deep down, all he wanted was to burn himself in it, even knowing it could destroy him as much as the woman he couldn't save 7 years ago, who remained alive in a secret room of the mansion, kept in a vegetative state by machines and the guilt Leon couldn't bury. The dawn over Charlottesville arrived with the song of cardinals and the aroma of fresh coffee coming from the main house. Clara woke with the feeling of not having slept well, haunted by confusing dreams where voices whispered her name between stone walls. She put on a pair of sturdy canvas pants, a long-sleeved shirt to protect herself from debris, and tied her hair in a tight bun. Today she would see up close the damage the fire had left on the chapel. Father Zeno was waiting for her at the chapel gate when she arrived, carrying her toolbox. He was a man of about 60, thin, with grey hair combed back, and piercing blue eyes. His cassock was impeccable despite the heat that was already building, and when he smiled to greet her, Clara noticed a sharp intelligence behind his gentle demeanor. "Mrs. Santoro, welcome to our little cathedral," he said, with a soft voice that carried an accent she couldn't quite place. "I am Father Zeno Bertoli, the family chaplain for over 20 years. Leon asked me to help you understand the spiritual importance of this place." Clara shook his outstretched hand, noting it was surprisingly firm. "Father, it's a pleasure. I'm eager to see the work that awaits me." "Ah, my child," Zeno said, opening the iron gate that protected the chapel entrance. "What awaits you here is much more than work. It is a rescue mission. These walls hold the soul of 5 generations of the Caravelli family." The chapel's interior was even more devastated than the photographs suggested. The vaulted ceiling, which must have once been majestic, now showed blackened beams and holes that let in shafts of sunlight. The wooden pews were stacked in a corner, covered by a tarp, and the main altar lay under a layer of ash and debris that not even 7 years had managed to completely clear away. But it was the walls that captured Clara's attention. The frescoes, though damaged, still showed traces of their former grandeur. She could distinguish angelic figures in shades of blue and gold, biblical scenes telling the story of salvation, faces of saints that seemed to watch her through layers of soot and time. The artist was Giuseppe Benedetti, Father Zeno explained, walking beside Clara as she examined every inch of the walls. He came from Rome specifically for this work in 1820. They say he was a tormented man who found peace only when he painted sacred themes. Clara stopped before a particularly intriguing fresco. It was a depiction of angels in a celestial dance, but there was something in the way they were painted that deviated from the traditional. They were sensual, almost too human, with expressions that suggested spiritual but also earthly ecstasy. "Interesting," she murmured, taking out a magnifying glass to examine the details. "The technique is flawless, but there's an artistic freedom here that must have caused controversy at the time." Father Zeno drew closer, and Clara caught a faint scent of incense and something medicinal she couldn't identify. Giuseppe was a revolutionary artist. He believed that the divine and the human should not be separated in sacred art. It caused some conflicts with the more conservative clergy in the region. "And the fire?" Clara asked, without taking her eyes off the fresco. "Where exactly did it start?" There was a pause. When Clara turned, she saw Father Zeno watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. It was as if he were evaluating something in her, measuring her reactions. "There," he pointed to what remained of the high altar. "It was a terrible night. Mr. Leon was not well at the time. He had lost his fiancée just 2 weeks before under tragic circumstances. Some believe he might have—" "Have what?" Clara interrupted. "Nothing, my child. Just malicious speculation from a small town. Mr. Leon is a good man. He just carries burdens that do not belong to him. Clara spent the rest of the morning taking detailed notes and photographing each damaged fresco. The work would be immense, but not impossible. Many of the figures could be recovered with the proper techniques. Some, however, were lost forever. It was nearly noon when she noticed a presence behind her. Leon was leaning against the chapel entrance, watching her work. He wore dark jeans and a light blue cotton shirt, sleeves rolled up, and there was something in his posture that suggested he had been there for a considerable time, just observing. "How's the assessment going?" he asked, approaching. Clara felt her heart speed up slightly. There was an intensity to Leon that both disturbed and attracted her. It was as if he carried a contained energy, something powerful that he kept carefully under control. "It's challenging," she replied, trying to maintain a professional tone. "But not impossible. I'll need specific materials. Natural pigments, special solvents, some tools I didn't bring." "Make a list," Leon said. "I'll provide everything you need." They walked together toward the chapel exit. Clara was putting away her tools when she asked, "May I ask why you decided to restore the frescoes now, after 7 years?" Leon stopped walking. For a moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost intimate. "Because it's time to make peace with the past," he said, "and maybe it's time to allow beauty back into this place." There were layers of meaning in those words that Clara couldn't fully decipher, but something in the way Leon looked at her made her stomach clench. It was as if he were talking about more than just frescoes. During lunch, served on the main house's veranda, Clara met other residents of the estate. Joseph, the oldest groundskeeper, a black man in his late 60s with calloused hands and kind eyes, who knew every corner of the property. Lucy, a young woman who helped Mrs. Vance with the household chores and spoke of Leon with almost reverent admiration. And John, the veterinarian who cared for the horses and cattle, a man in his early 30s with a shy demeanor but an easy smile. Everyone was kind to Clara, but she noticed an underlying tension in their conversations. When they mentioned the period before the fire, their voices lowered. When they spoke of Leon, there was a mixture of loyalty and concern she couldn't quite understand. "The mister changed a lot after what happened," Mrs. Vance confided to Clara as they were washing dishes. "He was a cheerful man before, always hosting artists and writers here at the estate. Now he barely leaves the house." "And his fiancée?" Clara asked, trying to sound casual. "How did she die?" Mrs. Vance stopped washing the plate in her hands. "Car accident," she said quickly. "Very sad. She was a beautiful girl, from one of Richmond's best families. They were to be married the following month." But there was something in Mrs. Vance's tone that suggested the story wasn't as simple as it seemed. Clara was about to ask more when Father Zeno entered the kitchen. "Mrs. Santoro," he said with his gentle smile, "I'd like to show you some documents about the chapel's history. They might help you better understand the context of the frescoes." Clara followed the priest to a small library attached to the main house. The walls were covered with religious books and historical documents, and there was an aroma of old paper and beeswax. Zeno showed her photographs of the chapel in its golden age, preparatory drawings for some of the frescoes, letters from the artist Giuseppe Benedetti. "Look at this one," he said, showing her a yellowed letter. "Giuseppe writes about finding the perfect synthesis between the sacred and the profane in his work here. He was a man obsessed with the idea that God could be found in the beauty of the human form." Clara examined the letter, written in ornate Italian. Even with her limited knowledge of the language, she could understand some passages where the artist spoke of his spiritual inspiration. "It's fascinating," she said, "and controversial for the time, I imagine." "Oh yes," Father Zeno agreed. Some members of the local clergy were scandalized. There were those who suggested the frescoes were inappropriate for a sacred space, too sensual. While leafing through the documents, Clara found something that made her stop. It was a more recent letter, dated 15 years ago, signed by her father, Anthony Santoro. The handwriting was unmistakable. She had grown up seeing that script. "This letter," she began. Father Zeno looked over her shoulder, and his expression subtly changed. "Ah, yes. Your father also worked here once. Long before the fire, of course. Clara quickly read the letter. Her father wrote about discovering something disturbing during a minor restoration he had done in the chapel, something about hidden layers in the frescoes and truths that were perhaps better left buried. What did my father mean by this? She asked. Father Zeno gently took the letter from her hands. Anthony was a very imaginative man. Sometimes he saw mysteries where there was only art. Unfortunately, his theories led him to make some questionable decisions. There was a coldness in the priest's voice that made Clara straighten up. What kind of decisions? My child, some secrets are best left in the past. Your father paid a high price for his curiosity. I would not want to see you follow the same path. It was a veiled warning, but Clara perceived it clearly. There was something in this place that people didn't want her to discover, and now she knew her father had been involved in it somehow. That afternoon, as she began the first cleaning tests on a small section of the fresco, Clara couldn't get her father's letter out of her head. What hidden layers had he discovered? And why did Father Zeno seem so determined to discourage her from asking questions? She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Leon approaching until she felt his presence just behind her. When she turned, he was there, watching her work with an intensity that made her blush. "Making progress," he said, his voice lower, almost intimate. "It's slow work," Clara replied, very aware of his proximity. Leon smelled of paint and turpentine, with an underlying note of something masculine and warm that made her think things she shouldn't be thinking about a client. "I have time," Leon said, and there was something in the way he said it that made Clara wonder if he was talking about more than just the restoration. They stood there for a moment, in the tense, charged silence that seemed to form naturally between them. Clara was about to say something when she heard footsteps at the chapel entrance. Father Zeno appeared, and Clara noticed how Leon immediately stepped away from her, as if caught doing something inappropriate. "Mr. Leon," the priest said with his gentle smile but alert eyes, "I didn't mean to interrupt, but Mrs. Vance needs to speak with you about the veterinarian's bills." Leon nodded, but before leaving he looked at Clara one more time. "If you need anything, I'll be at the house," he said, and there was an implicit promise in those words that made her heart race. After Leon left, Father Zeno approached Clara. "My child," he said softly, "may I offer you a piece of advice?" Clara looked at him, waiting. "Be careful," Zeno said, and his voice was laden with something she couldn't identify. "This family carries heavy burdens. Sometimes when we try to help carry other people's weight, we end up being crushed by it." It was another warning, but this time Clara had the feeling it wasn't just about historical curiosity. There was something in the way Father Zeno watched her that suggested he saw something between her and Leon, something he considered dangerous. That night Clara dined alone in the cottage, her mind buzzing with unanswered questions. Her father's letter, Father Zeno's warnings, the tension she felt whenever Leon was near, it all mixed in her head like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't assemble. She was washing the dishes when she saw a light on in the east wing of the main house, a window that had remained dark on previous nights. On impulse, she grabbed a pair of binoculars she had brought to examine details of the frescoes and looked toward the window. Leon was there, and he was painting. Even from a distance, Clara could see the concentration on his face, the way his body moved with the familiarity of someone who had spent his life holding brushes. There were several canvases scattered around what looked like a studio, and Clara wondered what kind of art Leon created, hidden from the world's eyes. She was about to lower the binoculars when Leon stopped painting and looked directly toward her window. Even from a distance, Clara felt the impact of that gaze. It was as if he knew he was being watched, as if he wanted to be seen. They remained like that for a moment that felt eternal, connected through the darkness of the Virginia night. Then, Leon lifted one of the canvases and held it up toward the window. Even from a distance, even through the binocular lenses, Clara recognized what was painted there. It was her. Clara spent a sleepless night. The image of Leon holding the painting of her face seared into her mind like a brand. How had he managed to capture her essence with such precision? And more importantly, How long had he been watching her to be able to paint her that way? The next morning, she arrived at the chapel earlier than usual, trying to focus on her work to push away the confusing thoughts that tormented her. She had begun the delicate cleaning of a fresco, depicting the Annunciation, when she noticed something strange. Beneath the layers of soot and grime, something appeared that the historical documents didn't mention, a second painting underneath the first. It was a technique known as pentimento, when an artist paints over a previous work, but over time, the original painting begins to show through the top layer. Clara had seen it before, but never so deliberately. It was as if Giuseppe Benedetti had intentionally hidden one work within another. She was photographing the discovery, when she heard Leon's deep voice behind her. Found something interesting. Clara turned, trying to ignore the racing of her heart. Leon was leaning against one of the chapel's columns, watching her with that intensity she was beginning to recognize. This time, however, there was something different in his eyes, a vulnerability that wasn't there before. "It seems your Italian artist kept secrets," she said, pointing to the wall. "There's a painting underneath this one. Probably the original, which was covered up for some reason." Leon approached to examine what she had discovered, as he leaned over her to get a better look. Clara felt the warmth of his body, the masculine scent she was starting to associate with sleepless nights and thoughts she shouldn't have about a man she barely knew. "Can you uncover what's underneath?" he asked, his voice lower, almost a whisper. "With the right techniques, yes," Clara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But it's a delicate process. I could damage the top layer if I'm not careful." "And what if I told you I don't care about the top layer?" Leon asked. "That maybe it's time for some truths to come to light?" Clara looked at him, surprised by the intensity of his response. "Why would you say that? These paintings are part of your family's heritage." Leon went to the chapel window, looking out at the landscape of mountains stretching to the horizon. "My family has a lot of heritage, Clara. Not all of it is a source of pride." There was a bitterness in his voice that made Clara draw closer. "What do you mean?" "You saw the painting I did of you," he said bluntly. It wasn't a question. Clara felt the blood rush to her face. I was looking out the window and—" "You don't have to explain," Leon interrupted, turning to face her. "I wanted you to see it." The silence that fell between them was charged with an electric tension Clara had never experienced before. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the chapel, leaving only the two of them and the acute awareness of their bodies' proximity. "Why?" she asked, her voice coming out huskier than she intended. Leon took a step toward her. "Because for 7 years, I haven't been able to paint anything but shadows and ghosts. And then you show up, and suddenly I remember what it's like to see beauty without guilt." The confession was like a punch to Clara's gut. There was a raw honesty in those words that left her defenseless. She wanted to step back, to maintain the professional distance she knew was necessary, but her feet wouldn't move. "Leon," she began, but he shook his head. "I know I shouldn't be saying this," he said. "You're here to work, and I'm your employer, but I can't pretend I don't feel what happens between us every time we're in the same room." Clara knew she should deny it, should say there was nothing between them but a professional relationship, but it would be a lie, and she was too tired of lying to herself. "This is crazy," she murmured, but she didn't move away when Leon took another step toward her. "Maybe," he agreed, "but it's the first real thing I've felt in a long time." Before Clara could fully process what was happening, Leon reached out and gently touched her face. His fingers were calloused from paint and brushes, but his touch was surprisingly tender. Clara closed her eyes, allowing herself for a moment just to feel. "You scare me," she whispered. "Why?" Leon asked, his voice also low. "Because it's been a long time since someone looked at me and saw something beyond my scars." The answer seemed to hit Leon deeply. He tilted his head, bringing his face closer to hers, and Clara felt she was about to cross a line that would change everything between them. But just then, Father Zeno's voice echoed through the chapel. "Mr. Leon, forgive the interruption, but you have visitors at the main house." Leon pulled back immediately, and Clara saw frustration and something else, perhaps relief, flash across his face. Father Zeno was at the chapel entrance, his expression carefully neutral, but Clara realized he had seen their proximity. "Of course, Father," Leon said, composing himself. "Mrs. Santoro, if you'll excuse me." After Leon left, Father Zeno approached Clara. She was trembling slightly, still processing what had almost happened. "My child," the priest said softly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Clara nodded, trying to focus on arranging her tools to hide her nervousness. "I see you're developing an affection for Mr. Leon," Zeno said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's natural. He is an attractive, intelligent, sensitive man, but there are things about him you do not know." "What kind of things?" Clara asked, though a part of her didn't want to hear the answer. Father Zeno sighed deeply. "Leon carries very heavy burdens, my child. The death of his fiancée destroyed him in ways you cannot imagine. He blames himself, and that guilt has made him unstable in his relationships." "Unstable how?" "He has a tendency to fall in love with the idea of salvation that a new person represents, but when reality sets in, when he realizes that no one can truly free him from his inner demons, he can be cruel. Not intentionally, but cruel nonetheless." Clara stopped arranging her tools and looked directly at the priest. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see in your eyes the same light I saw in Isabella's eyes 7 years ago," Zeno replied, "and I know how that story ended." The name of the deceased fiancée hit Clara like a slap. Isabella. It was the first time anyone had mentioned her name, making her real, more than just an abstract tragedy. "How exactly did she die?" Clara asked, and this time her voice had a firmness that surprised even her. Father Zeno hesitated. "It was a car accident. She was leaving the estate late at night after an argument with Leon. The road was wet from the rain. She took a curve too fast." "What kind of argument?" "That, my child, is something only Leon can tell you, if he ever can." That afternoon, Clara worked in the chapel with a fierce concentration, trying to use the focus on her work to quiet the turbulent thoughts the priest's words had awakened. She continued the delicate cleaning of the hidden painting, slowly revealing an image that intrigued her. It wasn't a traditional religious scene like the others. It appeared to be a portrait, a young, very beautiful woman with dark hair and expressive eyes. But there was something in the painting that bothered her. The woman's expression was not serene, as would be typical in a portrait of the era. There was fear there, or perhaps a plea. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the hours passing. When she finally looked at her watch, it was past 7 in the evening. The natural light was fading, and she would have to stop for the day. That's when she heard voices coming from the direction of the main house. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clearly argumentative. Curious, she left the chapel and walked a few yards toward the sound. The voices were coming from an open window on the 2nd floor of the house. One of them she recognized as Leon's, tense and raised. The other was a woman she didn't know, a polite voice, a New York accent, but with a cutting coldness. "You can't go on like this, Leon. It's been 7 years. It's time to make a decision." "It's not that simple, Helen," Leon replied, and there was a deep pain in his voice. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. I understand that you're hiding behind your guilt to avoid living. And now, from what I hear, you're involving other people in your obsession." Clara felt a chill in her stomach. Were they talking about her? "Clara has nothing to do with this," Leon said, confirming her fears. "Doesn't she? A restorer, Leon? The daughter of the man who nearly destroyed your family's reputation? You don't think that's too much of a coincidence?" "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that maybe you should ask yourself why Father Zeno insisted so strongly that she specifically be hired for this job." There was a silence that seemed to last forever. When Leon spoke again, his voice was different, colder, more dangerous. "What do you know that I don't, Helen?" "I know that some wounds never heal, no matter how hard we try to bury them," the woman replied. "And I know that Zeno never does anything without a very specific reason." Clara backed away slowly, her heart pounding. There were implications in that conversation, She couldn't fully process, but one thing was clear. Her presence at the estate was not as casual as she had thought. Someone, Father Zeno, had brought her here for reasons she didn't understand. She hurried back to the cottage, her mind racing. Who was Helen? And what did Father Zeno really want from her? Was the connection between her father and the Caravelli family deeper than she had imagined? She was making coffee when she heard a soft knock at the door. Her heart leaped. Was it Leon? But when she opened it, she found Mrs. Vance carrying a dinner tray. "You didn't come for dinner, miss," the older woman said, entering without an invitation. "I thought you might be feeling unwell." "I'm fine, thank you," Clara said, but she gratefully accepted the tray with stewed chicken, rice, and a traditional bean and sausage hash. "Mrs. Vance, can I ask you something?" The woman nodded, but Clara noticed she tensed slightly. "Who is Helen?" Mrs. Vance sighed. "Helen Caravelli, Mr. Leon's younger sister, a doctor in New York. She comes here now and then to try to convince him to resolve some pending issues." "What kind of issues?" Mrs. Vance looked around as if afraid of being overheard. "My child, there are things in this house it's better not to meddle with. The Caravelli family has always been good to those who work here, but they have their secrets, and some secrets exist for good reasons." After Mrs. Vance left, Clara felt even more uneasy. She felt like she was at the center of a game whose rules she didn't know. She decided that the next day she would confront Father Zeno directly. She needed to know the truth about why she had been chosen for this job, but fate had other plans. It was nearly midnight when Clara was awakened by a strange noise. At first she thought it was the wind, but then she heard it clearly. It was someone crying. Low, muffled sobs, like someone trying not to be heard. She wrapped herself in a robe and went out onto the porch. The sound was coming from the direction of the main house, specifically from the wing that always remained dark. But tonight there was a faint light on, and Clara could see a silhouette moving behind the curtains. Without fully thinking about what she was doing, she left the cottage and walked toward the house. The sobs became clearer as she approached. It was definitely a woman, and there was something in the timbre of that voice that made her blood run cold. She reached a ground-floor window that was slightly ajar. Through the crack she could partially see what looked like a makeshift hospital room. There was medical equipment, a bed with rails, and Clara had to grab the windowsill to keep from falling. In the bed, connected to tubes and monitors, was a young woman with dark hair. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring at the ceiling without seeing anything. And beside the bed, holding her hand and crying silently, was Leon. The fiancé who had supposedly died 7 years ago was alive. Isabella was alive, but in a vegetative state, kept there like a terrible secret that Leon could neither bury nor set free. Clara backed away slowly, her mind struggling to process what she had just discovered. It all made sense now. Leon's guilt, his isolation, Father Zeno's warnings, the conversation with Helen. He wasn't a widower tormented by loss. He was a man imprisoned by a living guilt, by a responsibility he didn't know how to bear. And she, Clara, had fallen in love with a man who belonged to another woman, a woman who couldn't fight for him, but who also couldn't let him go. Clara spent the rest of the night pacing the cottage like a caged animal, her mind unable to fully process what she had discovered. Isabella was alive. 7 years in a vegetative state, kept secret, while Leon consumed himself with guilt and isolation. And she, like a fool, had started to fall in love with a man who was essentially married to a woman who couldn't even recognize him. When dawn came, Clara had already made a decision. She couldn't keep pretending she didn't know the truth. She needed to confront Leon, understand exactly what situation she had gotten herself into, and probably prepare to leave. She arrived at the chapel later than usual, her hands trembling slightly as she organized her tools. She didn't have to wait long. Leon appeared before 9 o'clock, but this time there was something different about him. He looked more tired, more haggard, as if he hadn't slept. "You seem troubled today," he said, watching her with those green eyes that she now knew hid terrible secrets. Clara stopped what she was doing and turned to face him directly. "Isabella is alive." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, and the effect it had on Leon was immediate and devastating, All the color drained from his face, and he leaned against the wall as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "How did you—" "I saw you last night," Clara said, keeping her voice steady despite the emotional chaos she felt. "She was crying, and you were holding her hand." Leon closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, there was a profound defeat in them that broke Clara's heart, even amidst her own pain. 7 years, he said, his voice just a whisper. 7 years in a vegetative state. The doctors say she can hear, maybe even understand some things, but she can't respond. Can't even blink voluntarily. Clara felt tears burning her eyes. "The accident—" "It wasn't an accident," Leon interrupted, and now there was a rawness in his voice that made her shudder. "She tried to kill herself, Clara. She took a whole bottle of tranquilizers and went driving in the rain. She wanted to die. And I was the reason." The silence that filled the chapel was as heavy as lead. Clara felt as if the air had become too thick to breathe. "Why?" she finally asked. Leon laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless sound. "Because I was a coward. Because I was about to marry a woman I didn't love enough just because it was what was expected of me. Because the night before the wedding, I had the cruel honesty to tell her that." Clara closed her eyes. The pain in Leon's voice was almost unbearable. "She had found out about my affairs," Leon continued, each word seeming to cost him immense effort. "About the other women. She came to confront me, expecting me to deny it, to promise to change, and instead, I told her the truth. I told her I didn't know if I could be faithful to her, that sometimes I felt suffocated by the idea of marriage. I told her maybe we should postpone everything until I was sure." "Leon." "She looked at me as if I had ripped her heart out with my bare hands," Leon went on, lost in his memories. "And maybe that's what I did. She left crying, took the car, and 2 hours later the police were calling me, telling me she was in the hospital." Clara felt as if she were watching Leon shatter before her eyes. The guilt he carried was almost tangible. "The doctors said that if I had authorized it, they could have turned off the machines after a few months," Leon said, his voice now just a thread. "But how could I do that? How could I kill the woman I had already destroyed with my cowardice?" "So you keep her alive out of guilt," Clara said, and she couldn't stop a bit of bitterness from seeping into her voice. "I keep her because it's the only way to atone for what I did," Leon replied. "It's the only way to ensure she receives the care she deserves." "And Father Zeno? Does he approve of this situation?" "Zeno is the one who makes it possible," Leon explained. "He has medical knowledge, gets the necessary equipment, cares for her with a dedication no nurse could have. He believes that as long as there is life, there is hope for a miracle." Clara shook her head, trying to understand the complex and sick situation she had become entangled in. "And me? Where do I fit into this story?" Leon looked at her with an intensity that made her take a half step back. "You don't fit, Clara. That's the problem. You appear in my life as a possibility of redemption I don't deserve, as a chance to feel something real after years of numbness, and that terrifies me because I know I have no right to want you." The raw, honest confession hit Clara like a wave. There was as much desire as desperation in Leon's voice, and she felt her defenses crumble. "Then why don't you push me away?" she asked, taking a step toward him. "Why do you paint me? Why do you look at me as if I'm the only real thing in your world?" "Because I'm a coward," Leon answered, self-loathing in his voice. "Because even knowing it's wrong, even knowing I'll end up hurting you too, I can't resist. You remind me of who I was before I became this broken man." Clara was now very close to him, could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "And what if I say I don't care, that I accept the situation as it is?" Leon looked at her as if she had said something blasphemous. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know perfectly well," Clara retorted, her own voice growing firmer. "I know it's complicated. I know it's morally questionable. I know it could hurt me. But I also know I haven't felt anything as real as what I feel for you in a very long time." For a moment, Leon seemed to fight with himself. Clara could see the internal war in his eyes. Desire versus responsibility, need versus guilt. And then, as if a dam had broken, He pulled her to him with a desperate urgency. The kiss was anything but gentle. It was hunger, desperation, months of accumulated tension exploding between them. Leon kissed like a thirsty man who had finally found water, and Clara responded with equal intensity, all her reservations dissolving in the heat of that moment. When they broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. Leon rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "This is madness," he murmured. "Then we're mad together," Clara whispered back. Leon opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Clara, I need you to understand. I can't promise you anything. I can't give you a normal future, a relationship without complications. Isabella is a responsibility I will carry for the rest of my life." "I know," Clara said, surprising herself with her own certainty. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for honesty. I'm asking that we don't pretend this doesn't exist between us." Leon studied her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize every detail of her face. Then slowly he reached out and touched her cheek with her tenderness that contrasted violently with the intensity of the earlier kiss. "You scare me," he said, echoing the words she had spoken days before. "Why?" "Because you make me want things I swore I'd never want again. Because when I look at you, for a few moments I forget the guilt. I forget the weight I carry, and that's dangerous." "Maybe that's exactly what you need," Clara suggested. "Maybe it's time to forgive yourself." Leon shook his head. "It's not that simple. There are things you don't know about your own presence here, Clara, things that could completely change how you feel about me." "What kind of things?" But before Leon could answer, Father Zeno appeared at the chapel entrance. If he noticed their proximity, he didn't show it. "Mr. Leon," he said in his usual soft voice, "Helen is waiting for you in the library. She says it's urgent." Leon sighed, clearly frustrated by the interruption. "Tell her I'll be there in a few minutes." But Zeno didn't move. Actually, she asked that Mrs. Santoro also join the conversation. Clara felt a chill in her stomach. "Me? Why?" Father Zeno smiled, but there was something in his expression she couldn't decipher. "I believe it has to do with some documents she brought about your family's history, my child." The walk to the library was made in tense silence. Clara felt she was about to discover something that would change everything, and from Leon's closed expression, he had the same feeling. Helen Caravelli was waiting in the library, and Clara had to admit she was an impressive woman. Tall, elegant, with the same green eyes as Leon, but with blonde hair tied in a flawless bun. She wore a grey suit that screamed, "Successful New York surgeon," and watched Clara with a curiosity that bordered on scientific coldness. "Mrs. Santoro," Helen said, rising to greet her. "We finally meet. I've heard a lot about your work here." "Dr. Caravelli," Clara replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Leon told me you're a doctor." "Neurosurgeon," Helen corrected, "and coincidentally, the doctor responsible for Isabella's case for the first 2 years after the accident." The information hit Clara like a slap. Helen had treated Isabella. She knew the whole case firsthand. "Why did you ask me to be here?" Clara asked directly. Helen smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "Because I've discovered some information about your father that I believe will interest all of us." She opened a folder and spread some documents on the table. Clara immediately recognized her father's handwriting on some letters, but there were also other documents, medical reports, old photographs, and what looked like pages from a diary. "Your father, Anthony Santoro, worked here for 3 months, 15 years ago," Helen began. "Officially, he was restoring some minor frescoes in the chapel. Unofficially, he was investigating some irregularities he had noticed during his work." "What kind of irregularities?" Leon asked, and Clara noted that he seemed as surprised as she was. "It seems Anthony discovered that someone was using the estate for unauthorized medical activities," Helen explained. "Experimental procedures, keeping patients without official records. Basically, a clandestine clinic." Clara felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. "That's impossible. My father never told me anything about..." Because he was silenced, Helen interrupted, picking up one of the letters. Look at this correspondence between him and a lawyer in Richmond. He was planning to report what he had discovered when he was discouraged from doing so. Leon was reading over Clara's shoulder, and she felt his tension rise. Discouraged by whom? Helen looked directly at Father Zeno, who had remained silent until then. I believe Father Zeno can answer that question better. The priest smiled sadly. I tried to protect Anthony, he said softly. I tried to make him understand that some truths are too dangerous to come to light. What truths? Clara demanded, her voice trembling with anger. The truth that this estate served for years as a treatment facility for patients whose families wanted to keep them hidden from society, Zeno explained. Daughters with mental health issues, sons with disabilities, inconvenient people who needed care but couldn't be committed to official institutions. Clara felt nausea rising in her stomach. And my father discovered this. Your father discovered not only that, but also that some of the treatments being applied were experimental, Helen added. Unauthorized procedures, drugs in testing phases, basically using vulnerable patients as guinea pigs. Leon was very pale. Are you saying that Isabella was brought here because Leon didn't know what to do with her, Helen said brutally. And Father Zeno offered a convenient solution. Keep her here, away from the eyes of the world, while testing treatments that no official hospital would allow. The silence that filled the library was deafening. Clara looked at Leon, watching horror grow in his eyes as he processed the implications of what Helen was saying. Are you telling me, Leon spoke slowly, that all these years, while I thought I was giving Isabella the best possible care, she was actually being used as a guinea pig? Father Zeno sighed deeply. Mr. Leon, everything I did was with the best intentions. The treatments I used on Isabella are promising they might one day save her. Without authorization, Helen cut in. Without proper protocols. Without ethical oversight. Father, you are not even a licensed physician. The reality of the situation hit Clara like an avalanche. Her father had discovered that the Caravelli estate was being used for illegal medical experiments. He had tried to report it and was silenced. And now, years later, she had been brought back to... Why me? She asked, looking directly at Father Zeno. Why did you bring me here? The priest's smile was sad, but there was something else there. Something Clara was beginning to recognize as manipulation. Because you are your father's daughter, my dear, he said softly. And because I had hoped that you could understand, as he could not, that sometimes it is necessary to sacrifice the letter of the law in the name of something greater. You wanted me to find out about Isabella, Clara realized. You wanted me to approve of what you're doing. I wanted you to see that Leon is a good man, trapped by impossible circumstances, Zeno admitted. I wanted you to help him accept that keeping Isabella here is the most compassionate choice. Clara looked at Leon and saw him looking at her with a mixture of horror and pleading. He had just discovered that his attempt to care for Isabella had become an unwitting complicity in illegal medical experiments. And she, Clara, had been brought there not just to restore frescoes, but to be manipulated into accepting and validating a situation that was fundamentally wrong, no matter how well-intentioned it might have been. The revelation of the true reason for her presence at the estate left Clara in a state of shock. She walked out of the library without a word, ignoring Leon's calls, and headed toward the cottage like a sleepwalker. Her mind struggled to process everything she had discovered. Her father had been silenced for trying to expose an illegal medical operation. Isabella had been used as a guinea pig for 7 years, and she had been brought here to legitimize this sick situation. In the cottage, Clara automatically began to pack her bags. She couldn't stay here a moment longer. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to flee this place, these people, this impossible situation she had allowed herself to become entangled in. She was folding her clothes when she heard a firm knock on the door. She knew it was Leon before she even opened it. He stood there, his expression tormented, still wearing the same clothes from the morning but now wrinkled, his hair disheveled as if he had run his hands through it repeatedly. "Don't leave," he said, as soon as she opened the door. "I can't stay," Clara replied, turning back into the cottage. Not after finding out I'm part of a manipulation. Leon followed her inside, closing the door. I didn't know, Clara. I swear on everything holy. I didn't know about the experiments, about your father, about any of it. Clara stopped packing her suitcase and turned to face him. There was sincerity in his eyes, but also desperation. But you knew you were keeping Isabella captive, she said. You knew you were hiding a woman in a vegetative state for 7 years. I thought I was taking care of her, Leon countered, his voice thick with pain. I thought I was giving her the best chance to recover, away from her family's pressure, away from the doctors who wanted to turn off the machines. And Father Zeno? You never questioned his medical qualifications? Leon ran his hands through his hair. He showed me credentials, showed me results from other cases. I wanted to believe there was hope. You have to understand, Clara. The guilt of causing her condition was killing me. Zeno offered a way to do something constructive with that guilt. Clara watched the man before her, this man she had fallen for unintentionally, unplanned, defenselessly. Leon was clearly shattered by the discovery that his attempt at redemption had become complicity in something terrible. And now, she asked, what are you going to do now that you know the truth? I'm going to report everything, Leon said without hesitation. I'm going to turn Zeno over to the authorities. I'm going to transfer Isabella to a proper hospital. I'm going to face the consequences of having been an unwitting accomplice in this situation. Clara studied his face, searching for signs of lies or manipulation, but found only raw honesty and determination. And after? She asked. After, I'll probably go to prison, Leon replied, with a bitterness that made her shudder. 7 years of keeping a person in captivity, even with good intentions, is not something a judge will overlook. Clara felt tears burning her eyes. Leon, that's why you have to leave, he continued, approaching her. That's why I can't let you get any more involved than you already are. Your reputation, your career, you can't be associated with this. And what if I don't want to leave? Clara asked, her own question surprising her. Leon stopped and looked at her as if he hadn't heard correctly. Clara, did you hear what I said? I'm going to be arrested. My life as it is over. Maybe it's time for your life as it is to be over, Clara said, a growing firmness in her voice. Maybe it's time for you to stop punishing yourself for a mistake you made when you were 28. It's not that simple. Yes, it is, Clara interrupted, taking a step toward him. You're going to do the right thing about Isabella. You're going to make sure she gets the proper treatment. You're going to face the consequences of your actions. But after that, you'll have a choice about what kind of man you want to be from now on. Leon watched her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, but not vulnerable. It was as if he were seeing something in her that she didn't even know existed. And you? He asked. What choices are you going to make? Clara thought about the question for a moment. She thought of her father who had tried to do the right thing and was silenced for it. She thought of the life she had been leading, safe, controlled, but essentially empty. She thought of the fear she had carried since the abusive relationship, the fear of trusting, of surrendering, of being hurt again. I'm going to choose to stay, she said finally. I'm going to choose to fight by your side, no matter how hard it gets. Clara, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, she interrupted him again, now very close. I understand that you're a man who made terrible mistakes trying to do the right thing. I understand that you carry guilt that is killing you from the inside. But I also understand that you're a man capable of true love, of sacrifice, of brutal honesty when necessary. Leon reached out and touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheek as if memorizing every detail. You'll regret it, he whispered. Maybe, Clara admitted, but I'll regret it far more if I run away now. If I let fear stop me from fighting for something real. The tension between them, which had been building for weeks, finally exploded. Leon pulled her to him with a desperate urgency, and this time Clara didn't hesitate to respond. The kiss was hunger, need, a mutual recognition that they were about to cross a line that would change everything between them. Clara, Leon murmured against her lips, are you sure? Because after this, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she replied, and realized it was true. What happened between them that night was much more than just physical consummation. It was. Two broken people finding healing in each other. The merging of two solitudes that discovered they no longer had to carry their burdens alone. Leon touched her like someone willingly burning himself, with a reverence that made Clara understand that for him, this was sacred. Every caress was a promise, every kiss a silent confession that he had found in her something he didn't know he was looking for. For Clara, it was the first time she had given herself completely, without fear. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. It was the first time she had been seen and accepted for who she was, including her scars, her fears, her fierce strength she had learned to hide. They made love with an intensity that bordered on desperation, as if they knew it might be the only time they would have. And maybe it was. But in that moment, in the dark of the cottage with the Virginia breeze coming through the window and the scent of jasmine from the garden, nothing else existed but the two of them. Afterward, lying amidst the rumpled sheets, Leon traced lazy circles on Clara's back as she rested her head on his chest. "You know, it's going to be hell," he said softly. "I know," Clara replied, "but I also know I don't want to face an easy hell alone when I can face a difficult hell with you." Leon laughed, and it was the first genuinely joyful sound Clara had heard from him in all the days they had spent together. "When did you decide you were brave?" he asked. "I think the moment I saw you painting my portrait," Clara admitted. "I realized there was someone who saw me in a way I didn't allow myself to see. And I wanted to be the woman you saw." They lay like that for hours, talking softly, planning how they would face the difficult days ahead. Leon would tell the authorities everything the next morning. Helen would help transfer Isabella to a proper hospital. The investigation into Father Zeno would begin. It was almost dawn when they heard the first sign that their plans would have to change. Sirens, lots of sirens, approaching the estate quickly. Leon got up immediately, going to the window. On the horizon he could see red and blue lights coming up the main road. "Police," he said, his voice tense. Again. Clara joined him at the window, wrapped only in a sheet. "Do you think Helen—" "No," Leon shook his head. "Helen wanted me to confess of my own free will. She wouldn't call the police without giving me the chance." But then they saw something that made their blood run cold. An orange glow was coming from the direction of the main house. Fire. "My God," Clara whispered. "The house is on fire." Leon was already dressing quickly. "I have to get there. Isabella—" "I'm going with you," Clara said, looking for her clothes. "No, it's too dangerous." "Leon," Clara grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "We're not going to start our partnership with you trying to protect me from everything. We'll face this together." For a moment, Leon seemed about to argue, but then he saw the determination in her face and nodded. "Together," he agreed. They ran toward the main house where they could already see flames consuming the east wing, exactly where Isabella was being kept. The firefighters were already at work, but the fire had spread quickly. That's when they saw Father Zeno being carried on a stretcher by paramedics. He was conscious, but clearly injured, with burns on his hands and arms. Helen ran toward them as soon as she saw them approach. "Zeno tried to move Isabella when he realized the fire was spreading," she explained quickly. "He managed to get her out of the room, but he got burned in the process. She's safe. She's already been taken to the hospital." Clara felt immense relief, but Leon looked confused. "How did the fire start?" he asked. Helen hesitated for a moment. "It seems it was intentional. Zeno confessed to the firefighters that he set fire to the wing where he kept the medical equipment. He said he'd rather destroy the evidence than see you go to prison because of him." The impact of the information hit Leon like a slap. Father Zeno, the man who had manipulated his guilt for years, who had used Isabella as a guinea pig for illegal experiments, had tried to protect him in the end. "Where is he now?" Leon asked. "He's been taken to the hospital too," Helen replied. "But Leon, there's something you need to know. Before the fire, he gave me this." Helen held out a sealed envelope with Leon's name written on the front. With slightly trembling hands, Leon opened the envelope and read the contents. Clara saw his expression change from confusion to shock, then to something she couldn't quite identify. "What is it?" she asked. Leon looked at her, then at Helen, as if he didn't know how to explain what he had read. "It's a full confession," he said finally. "Zeno admits everything. The illegal experiments, the manipulation of my guilt, using Isabella as a guinea pig. But also, there's something about her recovery, Clara." "Her recovery?" "Isabella," Leon explained, his voice filled with a complex emotion. "Zeno writes that she started showing signs of consciousness 3 months ago, small but consistent. He believes she might be recovering." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the firefighters working to control the blaze. Clara processed the information slowly. "So she could recover," she said finally. "She could go back to being herself." "Maybe," Leon replied, and there was both hope and terror in his voice. Clara understood the dilemma immediately. If Isabella recovered, if she became the woman she was before the accident, what would that mean for Leon? For the two of them? For the relationship that had just been born between them? "Leon," she said softly, taking his hand, "no matter what happens, no matter if Isabella recovers or not, you're going to do the right thing for her. You'll make sure she gets the proper treatment. You'll leave the decision about her future in the hands of competent doctors." Leon squeezed her hand. "And if she recovers, what if she wants to pick up our life where we left off?" Clara took a deep breath, finding a strength within herself she didn't know she possessed. "Then you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be," she said. "The man who hides behind guilt and obligation, or the man who has the courage to seek genuine happiness, even when it comes with complications." Leon looked at her as if he were seeing a miracle. "And you?" he asked. "Will you wait while I figure all this out?" Clara smiled, and it was the first completely free smile she had given in years. "I will fight," she said. "I'll fight for you, for us, for the possibility of building something real together. But I won't wait passively. I will be an active participant, and in my own life, for the first time in a long time." As they watched the east wing of the house be consumed by flames, Clara and Leon stood hand in hand, knowing they were witnessing not just the destruction of a place, but the end of an era. The era of secrets, of manipulation, of paralyzing guilt. What came next would be uncertain, complicated, possibly painful, but it would be real, and it would be theirs. 6 months later, Clara stood on the porch of the new studio Leon had set up in the renovated part of the main house, watching him work on a large canvas depicting the restored chapel. The January morning was warm, but the breeze coming from the mountains made it pleasant. Her fingers automatically traced the final details of a report on the fresco restoration, a job she had completed 3 weeks earlier. The months following the fire had been intense, painful, but also transformative. The investigation into Father Zeno had uncovered a network of patients being treated illegally at the estate for over a decade. Wealthy families who preferred to hide inconvenient members in unconventional treatments rather than face the social stigma of officials. Psychiatric institutions. Leon had cooperated fully with the authorities, handing over all the documents he could find and testifying against Zeno in exchange for immunity. The priest's written confession had been crucial in Leon being seen as a victim of manipulation rather than a knowing accomplice. Father Zeno, after recovering from his burns, was sentenced to 8 years in prison for practicing medicine without a license and unlawful imprisonment. During the trial, it was revealed that he had lost his medical license 15 years prior after being involved in unauthorized experiments at a Richmond hospital. The Caravelli estate had been his refuge and personal laboratory ever since, but the most shocking revelation had come a month after the fire. Isabella had woken up. Clara vividly remembered the day Leon got the call from the hospital. She was organizing her work materials in the chapel when she saw him running toward his car, his face a mixture of hope and absolute terror. She didn't hesitate. She got in the car with him, and they drove to Richmond together. Isabella Montgomery, at 32, was a different woman from the 25-year-old who had tried to take her own life 7 years before. The years in a vegetative state had left physical marks, atrophied muscles that would require months of physical therapy, compromised reflexes, an initial difficulty with speech. But her brown eyes held the intelligence Leon remembered, and they held something new, a peace that hadn't been there before. The reunion between them was one of the most difficult scenes Clara had ever witnessed. Leon had approached the hospital bed with hesitant steps, as if Isabella were a mirage that could vanish at any moment. Isabella had looked at him for a long time before speaking. "Leon," she had said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "You look older." "Isabella, I need to ask your forgiveness," Leon had begun, but she interrupted him by raising a hand with effort. "No," she said softly. "There's nothing to forgive. We were both different people then. We both made mistakes." Clara had watched from a chair in the corner of the room, her heart breaking for the pain she saw on Leon's face. But there was also a growing admiration for Isabella, for the grace with which she was handling an impossible situation. Over the following days, as Isabella recovered physically, the conversations between her and Leon became longer and more honest. Isabella vaguely remembered the years in the vegetative state, sensations, voices, sometimes an awareness that Leon was there, but there was something more. "I dreamed," Isabella had told them one afternoon, "I dreamed I was a butterfly trapped in a chrysalis, and I knew that one day I would fly, but I also knew that when I did, I would be a completely different creature." It was Isabella who first asked about Clara. "That's the woman you love now," she had said, watching the way Leon looked at Clara when he thought no one was paying attention. Leon had tensed, clearly prepared for denials and complicated explanations, but Isabella had smiled. "It's time, Leon. It's time for you to let us both be happy." The most difficult conversation had happened a week later, when Isabella was strong enough for a deeper discussion. Clara had offered to leave to give them privacy, but Isabella had insisted she stay. "I want you both to hear this," Isabella said, sitting up in the hospital bed with the morning sun illuminating her thin but determined face. "I remember the night I tried to kill myself. I remember the anger, the despair, the feeling that my life was over before it had even really begun." Leon had tried to speak, but Isabella continued. "But I also remember something I discovered during all those years of sleep. I discovered that true love isn't possession. It isn't obligation. It's wanting the person you love to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you." She had looked directly at Clara then. "And you, Clara, I see in your eyes what Leon means to you. It's not a desperate or dependent love. It's a love that strengthens him, that makes him want to be a better man. That's the kind of love he deserves." Isabella had paused, gathering her strength for what came next. "I don't want to resume a relationship with Leon. I want to build a friendship with him, if he's willing. I want to get to know the woman who helped him find peace. And I want to rebuild my own life, to discover who I am now, without the shadow of who I used to be." Isabella's words had freed Leon from a prison of guilt he had carried for 7 years. Not immediately. It took months of therapy, difficult conversations, and the slow work of forgiving himself. But gradually, Clara watched the tormented man she had met transform into someone capable of accepting happiness. Now, 6 months later, Isabella was living in a small house in Richmond that Leon had bought for her, where she was undergoing physical therapy and had started studying psychology, a career she said she discovered during her years of forced introspection. She visited the estate occasionally, especially to see the restored frescoes in the chapel. The chapel had become the most important project of Clara's career. Not only had she managed to recover Giuseppe Benedetti's original paintings, but she had also uncovered and restored the hidden layers her father had found years before. The secret paintings told a parallel story, the Italian artist's struggle between his faith and his human desires, expressed in images of a disturbing beauty that challenged the conventions of sacred art. The Virginia Department of Historic Resources had classified the chapel as one of the most important artistic discoveries of the decade. Clara had been invited to speak at conferences, write articles, and lead other restoration projects. But most importantly to her, she had managed to honor her father's memory, proving that Anthony Santoro had been a man of integrity who had tried to do the right thing. "Finished the report?" Leon asked, interrupting her thoughts. Clara looked at him, dark hair shining in the sun, white shirt stained with paint, those green eyes now glowing with a peace she had helped build, and felt the same shiver of love she felt every morning waking up next to him. "Finished," she replied, closing her laptop. "And you? How's the painting?" Leon wiped his hands on a rag and approached her, wrapping her in his arms from behind. Clara leaned back against him, feeling the familiar warmth of his body, the scent of paint and coffee that always accompanied him. "I'm thinking of having an exhibition," he said, kissing the top of her head. "All the paintings I've done since you arrived. I want to call it Rebirth." "They'll ask about the inspiration," Clara noted, turning in his arms to face him. "And I'll tell the truth," Leon replied, smiling, "that sometimes in life, a special person comes along and reminds you that you're still capable of beauty, of love, of a new beginning." Clara reached up to kiss him, a soft kiss that spoke of shared mornings and intertwined nights, of projects planned together and dreams that now included two people. "By the way," Leon said when they parted, "Helen called earlier. She wants to know if we've confirmed for her wedding in March." Clara laughed. Helen had fully reconciled with her brother after the events at the estate, especially when she saw how Clara had transformed him. The doctor had even apologized for her initial coldness, admitting she had been protecting Leon from another potential disappointment. "Of course we're going," Clara said. "I still can't believe she's marrying John." The romance between the New York neurosurgeon and the shy estate veterinarian had surprised everyone. But Clara understood. Sometimes love appeared in the most unexpected places, with the most unlikely people. "Speaking of weddings," Leon began, and Clara felt her heart quicken. They had talked about it several times in recent months. Leon wanted to make their union official, but Clara had asked for time, not out of fear or uncertainty, but because she wanted to be sure she was choosing marriage for love, not out of need or pressure. "Leon," she began. "I know," he said, smiling. "You'll tell me when you're ready. I'm in. No hurry. I'm certain I'm going to spend the rest of my life with you, with or without a signed paper." The quiet confidence in his voice made Clara fall in love with him all over again. This was one of the things she loved most about Leon. He had learned to love without possessiveness, to support without suffocating, to be present without being invasive. "Actually," Clara said, taking his hand and lacing her fingers with his, "I wanted to talk about that." Leon raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I'm ready," she said simply. "If you still want to, I'm ready to marry you." The look of pure shock on Leon's face was quickly replaced by the most genuine joy Clara had ever seen. He swept her up into his arms and spun her around, making her laugh out loud. "Are you sure?" he asked when he set her down again. "I'm sure," Clara replied. "I want to build an official life with you. I want the world to know we've chosen to be together. I want to wear your ring and have your children and argue about what color to paint the kitchen." "Yellow," Leon said immediately. "Definitely yellow." Clara laughed, again marveling at the ease with which they could switch between deep seriousness and everyday lightness. This was what a healthy relationship felt like, the ability to be completely yourself with another person. That afternoon they walked to the restored chapel. It was a tradition they had developed, visiting the place where they met, where it all began, whenever they had something important to share. The chapel was beautiful in the golden late-day light. Giuseppe Benedetti's frescoes shone as if they had been painted the day before, and the hidden painting Clara had discovered was now displayed on a side wall, protected by special glass. "You know, she's still the most beautiful woman he ever painted," Leon said, looking at the secret portrait. "He loved her," Clara agreed. "You can feel it in the way he painted every detail of her face." "Just like I feel when I paint you," Leon said, pulling her closer. They stood there in silence for a few moments, absorbing the peace of the place. Clara thought of all the lives that had been touched by it, Giuseppe Benedetti and his secret muse, the generations of the Caravelli family who had married and been baptized there. Father Zeno, with his sick obsessions, Isabella in her suffering, her father in his search for truth. And now her and Leon, finding love amidst the rubble of shattered lives, building something new on the foundations of what had been broken. "Want to make it official?" Clara asked suddenly. Leon looked at her, confused. What? The proposal. I want you to ask me to marry you, here, in this place where we met. Leon smiled, understanding the symbolic importance of the moment. He knelt right there in the restored chapel, among the painted angels who had witnessed their first conversation. Clara Santoro, he said, taking her hands, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, with all the complications, joys, and adventures that will include? Yes, Clara answered without hesitation. I want all of it. I want you. When they kissed there, under the gaze of Giuseppe Benedetti's angels, Clara felt as if she were closing a circle that had begun long before she was born. Her father had found secrets in this place, but she had found love. He had been silenced for trying to expose the truth, but she had found her voice through the courage to love without fear. 3 months later, Clara and Leon were married in a simple ceremony in the restored chapel itself. Isabella was one of the maids of honor, radiant in a blue dress that highlighted her eyes, walking with steps that were still careful but determined. Helen was the other, having postponed her own wedding to be present for her brothers. Mrs. Vance cried throughout the entire ceremony, declaring she had never seen Mr. Leon so happy. John served as best man, alongside one of Leon's friends from New York, and even Joseph gave an emotional speech at the reception about how true love always finds a way to blossom. But it was the exchange of vows that moved everyone present the most. Leon and Clara had written their own, and the words they shared echoed between the walls that had witnessed so much suffering and now celebrated pure joy. Clara, Leon said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, you taught me that it's possible to start over, that true love doesn't come to complete you, but to celebrate who you already are. I promise to love your strength as much as your vulnerability, to support your dreams as much as I share my own. Leon, Clara replied, you showed me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to love in spite of it. I promise to fight for us every day, to celebrate our happiness without guilt, and to build a life with you that honors both our past and our hopes for the future. Now, a year after the wedding, Clara watched Leon painting in the estate garden while she worked on organizing his next exhibition. Life wasn't perfect. They had arguments about money, about where to go on vacation, about whether Leon left too much paint in the kitchen sink, but it was real, built on honesty and mutual respect, and it grew stronger every day. Isabella had graduated with a degree in psychology and now worked with coma patients in a Richmond hospital. She and Clara had developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and the understanding that they had shared the love of the same man at different points in their lives. The Caravelli estate had become not just a home, but a cultural center. Leon donated part of the profits from his exhibitions to research funds for vegetative states, and Clara offered restoration courses for university students. They had transformed pain into purpose, secrecy into openness. On the folder beside Clara was an invitation she had received that morning, an offer to restore frescoes in a historic church in Charleston. It was a 2-year project that would require them to temporarily move to South Carolina. When she showed the invitation to Leon, he simply smiled. "When do we leave?" he asked. "Don't you want to think about it? It's a big move. It will interrupt your series of exhibitions here." Leon cut her off with a soft kiss. "Clara, my love, you still don't get it. Where you go, I go. Your dreams are my dreams. Your adventures are our adventures." That night, as they planned their move to Charleston, Clara remembered the words Leon had said on the day they met. Maybe it's time to allow beauty back into this place. He had been right, but not just about the chapel or the estate. He had been right about them, about the human capacity to heal, to grow, to find light in even the darkest of circumstances. There were loves that don't save, Clara knew now. There were loves that don't cease, but there were also loves that simply are reborn. Loves that transform broken people into whole people. Loves that prove every ending can be a new beginning if you have enough courage to start again. And as Leon held her that night, under the Virginia stars that had witnessed their first meeting, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she had found that kind of love. The kind that lasts not just for a night, but for a lifetime.